Hello, my name's Michelle Long. I'm a clinical specialist physiotherapist by background, and I'm currently seconded to NHS England as the South East SQuIRe. SQuIRe stands for Stroke Quality Improvement in Rehabilitation Manager. The SQuIRe initiative is designed to support stroke teams to run quality improvement projects that will improve delivery of the integrated community stroke service model. You can read the full integrated community stroke service model in a link from this peer network newsletter. To summarise, the model describes post-acute stroke rehabilitation services that provide 7-day responsive, intensive, needs-led community rehabilitation with integration at the heart of the delivery. Today, I'm going to talk to you about our journey so far. So there's a section of presentation talking about projects, and this part of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about our data journey. So before I talk about the improvement projects, I thought it would be useful to summarise our region and to talk about our findings from your data submissions to the post-acute audit in SNAP and the clinical audit submissions from October to December last year. The South East region consists of 5 ISDNs and 6 ICSs. It's a network of networks. It has the largest regional population, and in 2011 census had lower rates of unemployment and deprivation than comparators in the Northwest. However, we also have an older population which may come with higher incidence of stroke and frailty. This will obviously impact on the demand on our services. In the following slides, I will talk a bit about our data and the journey of discovery regarding what our data tells us. We need your help to improve our data and understanding. This bar graph represents the post-acute inpatient audit data against each key indicator. The key indicators are described on the right in brief. It plots the number of post-acute inpatient services compliant with each indicator. It's a regional representation and so includes all ISDNs and all services that submitted to the post-acute audit. Later, I will show you the same data broken down by each ISDN. If you take a moment to look at the graph, you can see that purple represents the number of services not meeting the indicator and orange the number meeting the key indicator. Green represents services that may be partially meeting the standard. The arrows show the key indicators relevant to the initial project considerations and represent indicators that have greater than 25% non-compliance across our region. Poor compliance with research is a consistent theme across all ISDNs and not a key indicator that we have focused on at all, but may be worth considering as a regional priority in conjunction with other projects. As there are established work streams on the Life After Stroke ISDN measures, we have to date not focused on these as part of SQuIRe, but this may change as projects develop. This graph represents the same as the previous one, but for the non-bedded community services. Difficulties with compliance in key indicators linked to workforce is a consistent theme across both inpatients and community, and it will obviously impact on our ability to provide 7-day needs-led responsive rehab. Each ISDN has a workforce workstream and significant work is underway to look at the workforce provision. However, looking at new ways of working may free workforce and improve efficiency. Do you have any ideas that would free existing resource and improve rehabilitation provision? If you do, we'd love to hear from you and to see project bids. In addition to taking a regional focus in the last 2 slides, we've reviewed the data specific to each ISDN so that we can be assured we understand and are addressing any inequities across the region. The following graphs provide the same post-acute data but broken down by ISDN. This graph shows post-acute inpatient service compliance for each ISDN, with Sussex on the far left, then Wessex, then Frimley Surrey Heartlands, then Bob, and finally Kent and Medway on the right. We've used this dashboard to check for inequities. Those key indicators circled demonstrate inequities and/or poor compliance. The next graph represents the same in the community services. Using this data, we've identified training and improving psychologically informed care have significant inequities across the region and are our 2 first regional project priorities. I will talk more about those in the next presentation. following slides represent regional psychology whole-time equivalents submitted to the post-acute organisational audit. And in order to demonstrate data challenges that we're having across our region, I've pulled off applicability and intensity data from the clinical data submissions for psychology linked to the same time period. I've used one ISDN with teams named covered as an example of findings from the clinical audit, but this is a representative of what we found across the region when we looked at this data. We pulled this data for all ISDNs and all reported professions and used this as a way of sense checking the post-acute organisational audit data and our understanding of priorities linked to workforce and provision. You will see that it has generated more questions and we want to work with you to understand our data collection. So this graph shows the psychology whole-time equivalent for the community non-bedded services. The orange line represents the national median. As you can see, many of our services reported staffing below the national median. However, there are significant numbers of teams listed with no whole-time equivalent. Does this represent no service or a failure to report or service provision where there's non-compliance to SNAP because it's provided by another team such as IAPT? Further investigation is required to understand this data, as the regional average for the key indicator 5 in the post-acute audit, teams were reporting that the access to psychology was at 75% of teams reporting. So the number of blank fields in this data don't seem to marry with our reporting against key indicator 5. This is the whole-time equivalent psychology data for bedded post-acute services, and it's showing a very similar picture. So we have blank data fields, so the same question applies. If we're submitting compliance of 75% against key indicator 5 in the post-acute audit, how do these whole-time equivalent numbers marry up with that? The following slides represent the one ISDN and the applicability and intensity data pulled for psychology, so that we can understand what we achieve in the context of that 75% of teams reporting access, but with low reporting of whole-time equivalents in teams. So this graph is taken from the clinically submitted SNAP data, October to December 21, and is therefore of the same time period as the post-acute audit. It represents the number of days patients were seen on average by a psychologist, as indicated by the diamond symbol, and the percentage of patients that were applicable for psychology, as seen by the purple bars. Significant numbers of teams are reporting that no patients were applicable for psychology. Those that do report applicability report up to 10% of patients applicable for psychology. Is this an accurate representation of need? When patients are seen, the numbers of days that they're seen by psychology are low. This graph represents the same applicability data, but also looks at minutes of psychology per day instead of number of days seen. Where the teams report no applicable patients in the team, does this represent no patients requiring psychology, or other service providers giving this input, or other team members meeting the needs, or a misinterpretation of the question where teams without a psychologist are submitting non-applicable? To understand why we would question this data, it's worth taking a moment to consider what research tells us about post-stroke psychology needs. Research such as Ayabi et al. In 2013 suggests that depression is prevalent in more than 50% of the stroke population. Patients with CVD have been identified at risk of cognitive loss, with up to 75% of stroke patients exhibiting significant cognitive impairment. Mellon et al. In 2015 in the ASPIRE-S study identified 50% of stroke patients experiencing cognitive impairment at 6 months. So these applicability numbers therefore appear to be low, and question whether this is a true representation of need. The NICE Quality Statement 3 in 2016 states that all stroke survivors should have access to a clinical psychologist that is specialist in stroke and part of the core team. When setting project aims and priorities, integration of core elements of the team need to be considered. From this data, we can see that we need to check our whole-time equivalents and how services are delivered. We need to understand whether we're providing unintegrated psychological care with psychology provision going unreported in SNAP and accounting for these applicability figures, or whether we have significant service gaps and under provision, or whether we truly have low need. Hand in hand with understanding the whole-time equivalent data, We therefore need to understand the need and complexity of our patients so that we can verify applicability data. We need your help to improve data collection and understanding of the data that we do have. As part of the psychology project, we will be aiming to understand and improve data submissions to SNAP and working with the psychology leads to design data collection that will capture stratified needs and complexity. We're also aiming to survey you, our teams, to find out what are the data you're collecting, for who and how and what it's used for. We would like you to review your post-acute and clinical SNAP data within your teams. What's the context of the story behind your data? Is your data accurate? And we would like you to work with your teams to improve our understanding of the data and data submissions. We will be surveying teams. Please take part. We want to understand what you collect and how, and what we can do to support better compliance with the data. We will be setting up a SNAP user group, so look out for it and take part. We will advertise it in the next newsletter. Consider how you can make data review and use an integral part of your service so that we can go on this data improvement journey together. Thanks for listening to me today. The next presentation will be about our projects.